My name is Lily Grace. I'm 34 years old and live alone in a cozy apartment in Boston. Most mornings start the same way: a strong shot of espresso, a quick scan of the weather report, and a peaceful walk to my office, which is just 2 blocks from home. I'm the co-founder of a biotech startup that focuses on breakthrough treatments in healthcare, a role that's hard to explain to anyone who thinks office work means sitting in a cubicle all day, shuffling papers. But to me, it's everything. It's the culmination of years of studying endless grant applications and countless sleepless nights. My family never really understood what I do, or maybe they never bothered to care. They always saw me as the odd one out, the quiet girl who didn't wear much makeup, who dressed in plain clothes, and always seemed to be on her laptop or deep in some conversation about proteins and patents. In their eyes, I was the supporting act to my older sister, Emily Ray. Emily is 3 years older, and she's always been the perfect daughter: beautiful, refined, soft-spoken, and blessed with that natural charm that makes people flock to her. Even in the family photos, I'm just a faint shadow next to Emily's spotlight. At every holiday gathering, Thanksgiving, Christmas, even birthdays, relatives would gather around her, like she was the guest of honor. "Emily, you look stunning in that dress," they'd gush. "Emily, your new boyfriend's a lawyer. That's amazing." And me, if they even remembered I was there, they'd just say, "Sophia. Oh, she's working in something with science, right?" I used to think that if I worked hard enough, if I stayed out of the way and kept my head down, maybe one day they'd notice. Maybe they'd be proud of me too. But the truth is, no matter how many late nights I put in, or how many contracts I secured for the company, their attention was always on Emily. My achievements were like footnotes at the end of a family chapter they'd already written without me. I've learned to smile faintly when people ask about my family. "We haven't talked in a while," I tell them. It's easier than explaining the silence that settled between us. Sophia had always carried the weight of her family's indifference with quiet grace. After years of feeling like the invisible sister, she'd come to accept that Emily would always be the center of their world. But acceptance didn't mean it didn't sting. Every holiday gathering, every phone call that turned into an update on Emily's latest accomplishment, it was like being politely shoved aside, told in subtle ways that she wasn't the story worth telling. She'd tried to be understanding. She'd told herself over and over that maybe her parents just didn't know how to talk about her job. After all, biomedical research wasn't exactly cocktail conversation. Maybe they didn't know how to ask about the papers she published or the grants she secured. Maybe they didn't realize that running a company, co-founding it from the ground up, with 3 scrappy college friends, was more than just some office job. She told herself these things because it was easier than admitting the truth: they didn't see her, and they didn't want to. Her father's voice haunted her, even in her quiet apartment. "Sophia, you're doing something in—" "What is it again?" "Science," he'd said once at a family dinner, dismissing her work with the wave of a hand, as if it were a hobby she'd eventually outgrow. And every time Emily was there, glowing and gracious, it was clear that Sophia's role was to stand in the background to make sure the family's golden girl had the perfect stage. That's why, for the longest time, Sophia thought that if she just kept giving, if she kept paying the bills, when things broke down, kept sending money, every time her parents hinted at needing a little help, then maybe one day they'd see her value. She never complained about the hundreds of dollars that quietly disappeared from her checking account each month. It was just part of the invisible contract she felt bound to, even though no one had asked her if she could afford it, if it was even fair. The money was always a small thing compared to the bigger feeling of belonging. That's what she was really buying. She realized the hope that her parents might one day say, "Thank you, Sophia. We're proud of you." But that thank you never came. Instead, it was always more requests, more quiet assumptions that Sophia would just take care of it, because she always did. She remembered one winter night, a few years back, when her mother called her at midnight. Sophia's phone had lit up in the dark room like a flare. "Sophia, the pipe in the bathroom burst. Emily's out of town. Can you call a plumber?" There was no "how are you," no "sorry for waking you." Just the expectation that Sophia would fix it like she always had. And she had. She'd stayed up all night coordinating repairs, sending payments, and making sure the house was in perfect shape by the time Emily returned with her new boyfriend. It had never been about the money. It was about the feeling that she was always the fallback plan, the safety net her parents barely acknowledged until they needed her. And in the back of her mind, she told herself that was love. That was family. You take care of each other. But there was always an unspoken clause she'd take care of them, and they'd take care of Emily. In the 2 years leading up to her mother's birthday, Sophia had poured nearly $16,000 into that house, into her parents' lives, without a single thank you. She didn't even realize how much it had added up until the day she decided to look. She'd opened her banking app out of habit, scrolling through the endless list of payments, electricity, water, internet, even the cable bill for channels she never watched. And when she saw the total, her heart didn't sink out of regret. It sank because she knew in that moment that no matter how much she gave it would never be enough to make them love her the way they loved Emily. That realization was still raw when she called her father to say she'd be coming home for her mother's birthday. She'd cleared her schedule weeks in advance, wanting to show that she still cared, that she was still part of the family, even if she didn't belong in the spotlight. She didn't expect a parade, but she thought maybe this year they'd at least let her be there. But her father's response wasn't what she'd imagined. His voice was calm, almost clinical, when he told her not to come. "It's best you stay, Sophia," he said, as if he were explaining the weather. "Emily's bringing her new boyfriend. He's a CFO, well-spoken, successful. Your job, well, it's hard to explain. You being there would just invite comparisons." There was a pause, one of those silences that carries more weight than words. "It's best for everyone." Sophia stood in her living room, the phone still pressed to her ear, and felt something crack deep inside. She thought of every late night she'd worked, every report she'd polished to perfection, every dollar she'd sent home without question. And in that moment, it all felt like a lie. A performance she'd been playing in a story she was never meant to be a part of. She tried to reason with him, her voice tight. "Dad, I want to be there. I've already cleared my schedule." But his answer was final. "If you insist on coming, then don't call me your father." And then he hung up. The room around her was quiet, so quiet it felt like she could hear her own heartbeat in her chest. She sat down on the edge of her couch, her hands trembling, not with anger, but with a deep, hollow ache. She stared at her phone, the screen dark now, and felt the truth settle over her, like a winter chill. She wasn't part of their family, not really. Not in the way Emily was. She was the footnote, the afterthought, the fixer they only remembered when something was broken. For the first time in her life, she didn't cry. There were no tears left for people who saw her as nothing more than a convenient answer to a problem. Instead, she stood up, walked to her desk, and opened her laptop. With a few simple clicks, she canceled every auto payment she'd set up, every quiet link that tied her to a family that didn't want her there unless she was paying for the privilege. The next morning, Sophia woke up to a dozen frantic messages. The house was in chaos without her. No power, no water, no internet. Her parents were panicking. Emily was furious, and through it all, Sophia felt a calm she hadn't known in years. She sipped her coffee slowly, watching the sun rise over Boston, and realized that, for the first time, she wasn't just the fixer. She was her own person, and she was done paying for love she'd never received. Lily Grace woke up that morning, feeling an unfamiliar stillness. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes from rest, but the quiet that follows a storm, has only just begun. The night before, she had canceled every bill, cut every line that had once tied her to her family's comfort. And though her phone buzzed constantly with frantic messages, she didn't feel the weight of guilt she once would have. Instead, she felt a clarity she'd never dared to let herself fully feel before. She remembered how she used to panic at the thought of disappointing her parents. How she would scramble to make sure everything was perfect, even if it meant emptying her own pockets or missing deadlines at work. She'd tell herself it was her responsibility, that it was what daughters did. But in that cold silence, after her father told her not to call him her father, she finally saw the truth. Her love had been real, but their love had always been conditional, and she was done paying a price that only she seemed to see. The messages kept coming as the sun rose higher in the sky. Her mother's voice on the voicemail trembling with worry. "Sophia, the power's out. The internet is down. Can you please check on it? It's your mother's birthday. Guests are arriving. Emily is in a panic. Please, just this once, help us." Then her father's text clipped and cold. "No water, no electricity. Call the providers immediately. Don't let your mother down today." And finally, a message from Emily, each word dripping with frustration and accusation. "Sophia, you're being selfish. Mom's about to cry. The house is falling apart, and you're ignoring us. How could you do this on today of all days?" Sophia read each message, one after the other, and felt a strange calm settle over her. She wasn't surprised by their words. It was the same pattern she'd always known: no apology for the way they'd pushed her away, no acknowledgement of the betrayal in her father's voice when he told her she was an embarrassment. Just more demands, more commands, more expectations that she would fix everything the way she always had. She set her phone down on the table, took a sip of her espresso, and let the bitterness of the drink ground her in the present. She wasn't going to fix it this time. The quiet of her apartment felt like a shield against the noise of their panic. She leaned back in her chair and let the sunlight filter in through the window, a soft reminder that the world kept turning even when you chose to stop playing the same old roles. She thought about the irony of it all, that on the day they'd tried so hard to impress Emily's new boyfriend, Lucas Grant, their perfect image was falling apart because she'd finally decided to stop carrying the weight alone. She wondered if Lucas would notice the chaos, if he would see the cracks in the facade Emily had worked so hard to polish, or if he, like everyone else, would only see the bright smiles and ignore the shadows behind them. Sophia didn't know, and she realized she didn't care. For once, it wasn't her job to make sure everything went smoothly. It wasn't her responsibility to be the one who kept everyone else comfortable while they made her feel invisible. She stood up and walked over to the window, watching the city come to life outside. People rushing to work, the smell of coffee in the air, the soft hum of traffic. It was a world that didn't revolve around her family's expectations, and she found herself breathing easier in that realization. When she sat back down, her phone buzzed again. A new message from Emily, her words more desperate now. "Please, Sophia, just for today. Don't ruin this for me. Lucas is meeting everyone. Don't let everything fall apart." Sophia almost laughed at the message. It was the first time Emily had ever asked her for anything without dressing it up in pretty words or fake concern. The desperation was raw, but it wasn't enough to move her anymore. She thought about what it meant that Emily's perfect day was built on Sophia's silence, that the family Emily wanted to show off was only held together by Sophia's quiet sacrifices. And now that those sacrifices were gone, the truth was showing itself in flickering lights and cold water pipes. She wondered if Emily would ever see it for what it was, or if she'd keep pretending even as the walls cracked around her. Sophia picked up her phone, typed out a reply, and then deleted it. She realized there was nothing she needed to say. Words wouldn't change the way her family saw her, and for once she was okay with that. She set the phone back down and closed her eyes, letting herself feel the calm that had always eluded her. It wasn't happiness exactly, but it was freedom. She spent the rest of the morning in her own world, finishing up a work report, answering emails, and planning out the next week's schedule. Every time her phone lit up with another demand, she ignored it. She wouldn't be their safety net anymore. She wouldn't be the invisible fixer who kept everything running while they praised Emily's perfect smile. When noon came and the messages turned into missed calls, Sophia felt a faint smile tug at the corner of her mouth. She could almost imagine the scene playing out in the house she used to call home. Emily's forced smile as the guests arrived, her parents whispering in the kitchen, the tension in the air as they all pretended nothing was wrong. She didn't feel the sting of exclusion this time. She felt relief. Because in that quiet apartment, she realized she wasn't the one being selfish. She was just done. Done with trying to prove herself to people who didn't care to look past their own comfort. Done with pouring her love and money into a family that only saw her worth when it was convenient. And done with feeling like she had to explain her absence as anything other than a choice she finally had the courage to make. As the afternoon sun shifted, Sophia sat back in her chair, feeling the light against her skin like a gentle reminder that she was still here, still strong. She didn't know what would come next, if her family would keep calling, if Emily would ever see the truth, or if Lucas would realize the cracks in the perfect family he was being introduced to. But she knew one thing: she wasn't going back. Not to that role. Not to that silence. She looked around her apartment, small, but filled with the quiet confidence of a woman who had finally drawn a line. It wasn't the home she grew up in, but it was hers. And for the first time in her life, that was enough. Sophia didn't expect to see Lucas Grant that soon, and certainly not under the fluorescent glow of the Pacific Genomics office. But life had its own sense of timing, cruel, precise, almost poetic. The morning after she stopped the payments, steady rhythm of work that never judged her, never compared her to Emily, and never asked her to be anything other than what she was. She was scanning through the staff transfer list when her heart gave a little stutter. There, it was Lucas Grant, head of finance New Jersey branch, transferring to Boston headquarters. Her name sat next to his on the approval line, a silent testament to the truth her family had never bothered to learn. She stared at it for a long moment, the irony sinking in. Emily's boyfriend, the one they'd wanted to show off to the family, was about to walk through these doors and report directly to the sister they'd tried to erase from the picture. Sophia closed the file, took a slow breath, and leaned back in her chair. She didn't need to do anything. Life had already written the script, and she was content to let it play out on its own. It was close to noon when she heard a quiet knock at her door. She looked up and saw Lucas standing there, a manila folder in his hands, his expression carefully neutral. But the moment their eyes met, something shifted. His polite smile faltered, his brow furrowed just slightly, and Sophia knew he'd recognized her. "Sophia," he said softly, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. She didn't let the moment stretch into something uncomfortable. Instead, she gave him a faint, composed smile, the one she'd perfected over years of being underestimated. "Welcome to Pacific Genomics, Lucas. I'll be reviewing the financial plan for this quarter. I look forward to working with you." Her tone was calm, professional, and utterly unshaken. Lucas's face went from surprise to something closer to panic. His lips parted, like he wanted to say more, but she simply slid the folder across the table and gestured for him to sit. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of the city outside, a distant echo of life moving on. Lucas hesitated for a moment, then took the chair across from her, his hands gripping the file like it was the only anchor he had. Sophia opened the report and began discussing the numbers. Her voice steady, her eyes focused only on the work. Emily didn't mention the birthday party that had fallen apart in the dark without her payments to prop it up. She didn't need to. The truth was, they're written in the silence between them. Lucas tried to keep up, but she could see the thoughts swirling behind his eyes. His words came out clipped and careful, his posture too stiff. Sophia wondered if he was thinking about that night, about the frantic texts, and the house that had gone dark at the worst possible moment. She wondered if he was starting to see the edges of the picture he'd been so quick to believe in. And she wondered if he realized that the woman sitting across from him now wasn't just the quiet sister. She was the woman who had built something on her own, without anyone's permission or praise. The meeting ended quickly, Lucas's responses growing more measured as he gathered his composure. When he finally stood, folder clutched in hand, he met her gaze one last time. "Sophia," he said, and there was something almost pleading in his voice, like he wanted to bridge the gap between them, but didn't know how. She just nodded politely and watched him walk out of the office each step, careful as if he were afraid the ground itself might give way beneath him. Sophia sat for a moment after he left, the door clicking shut behind him. She didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel vindication. What she felt was the quiet satisfaction of finally letting the truth speak for itself. Her family might have chosen to keep her in the shadows, but in this place, in this world, she had helped build, there was no hiding from the light. the world saw her as she was capable, driven, and entirely her own person. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and spreadsheets, but in the back of her mind, the encounter with Lucas played over and over like a quiet drumbeat. She wondered what Emily would say when she found out. She wondered if her parents would still cling to their perfect image when the truth was standing right in front of them in a tailored suit and a stiff, uncertain smile. When Sophia finally left the office that evening, the city was wrapped in the golden glow of a setting sun, the light slanting across the skyscrapers like a promise. She stepped out into the crisp air, her bag slung over her shoulder, and paused for a moment to take it all in. This was her city. This was her life. And for once, it felt like enough. She knew that her family would call again. She knew that Emily would find a way to spin the story, to paint Sophia as cold or vindictive, the sister who had ruined everything on purpose. But she also knew that she didn't owe them an explanation. She had spent her whole life trying to fit herself into a role they'd written for her, one where she was always the afterthought, always the quiet one who paid the bills and kept the lights on without complaint. That role was gone now, and she wasn't going to step back into it. As she walked down the crowded sidewalk, she felt the weight of years of quiet obedience slipping from her shoulders. She wasn't sure what would happen next, if Lucas would say something to Emily, if her parents would ever acknowledge the part she'd played in holding them all together. But she was done carrying it alone. For the first time, she felt the power of her own choices, the quiet strength that had always been there. Attempt to keep the truth from sinking in. But the truth had already spoken for itself, and there was no amount of soft smiles or sweet words that could erase what Lucas had seen. Sophia had always believed that someday, somehow Emily's perfect world would crack open under the weight of its own pretenses. She just hadn't expected it to happen so quickly or so completely. The morning after Lucas's first day at the Boston office, Sophia opened her inbox to find a message from him. Its subject line, short and polite, follow-up. She clicked it open, reading his measured words, thanking her for her time in the meeting, expressing his respect for her leadership. But beneath the corporate politeness, she could feel the weight of unspoken questions, the strain of someone seeing the careful facade of the woman he thought he knew unravel in real time. She didn't reply immediately. She wanted him to sit with the truth to let it settle before she offered him any reassurance. After all, this wasn't her burden to carry. It never had been. By mid-afternoon, her phone buzzed with a call from Emily. Sophia watched it ring until it went silent. A second later, a text arrived, urgent and demanding, "Sophia, we need to talk. Call me back." She didn't. Instead, she finished reviewing the quarterly financial report Lucas had submitted, noting his precise figures and neat summaries. He was good at his job, she could see that clearly, but she wondered how much longer he could work beside her without feeling the growing weight of everything that had been left unsaid. She didn't intend to make it easier for him, not because she wanted to punish him, but because she finally understood that some truths needed to be faced head-on, not cushioned by careful explanations. That evening, as she walked home through the dusky streets of Boston, she let her mind wander back to the night her father had told her not to come home. She could still hear the finality in his voice, the way he'd said those words, as if they were nothing more than a statement of fact. And she realized that for all the pain they'd caused her, those words had also set her free. They had given her permission to stop trying to prove herself to people who had already decided she wasn't enough. And in that freedom, she found a kind of quiet power she had never known. When she got home, her phone was lit up with messages, Emily again, her mother's soft, pleading words, even a short clipped note from her father, "Call your mother. She's worried sick." Sophia set the phone face down on the table and made herself a cup of tea. She didn't owe them her comfort anymore. She had spent too many years giving them everything she had, hoping they would see her value her. But the only person who needed to see her now was herself. The next morning, Lucas knocked on her office door again. He stood there, a hesitant look in his eyes, and she gestured for him to come in. "Sophia," he said quietly, his voice lower than usual. "I know it's not my place, but I wanted to say that I'm sorry. I didn't know the full story. I didn't know how they treated you." His words were careful, measured like he was afraid of saying too much or too little. Sophia listened without interrupting her face, calm and composed. "Lucas," she said when he finished, "there's nothing to apologize for. The truth is what it is. We don't need to talk about it any further. Let's keep this professional." She watched the relief flicker across his face, followed by something that looked like shame. But she didn't press it. She wasn't here to comfort him. She was here to do her job, and that was enough. As the days turned into a week, Sophia could feel the undercurrents shifting. Emily's texts became more frantic, her words losing their polish as she tried to claw back control of a situation that was no longer hers to manage. "Sophia, I know you're angry," one message read. "Roll now," no matter how much Emily begged. Her parents' messages were softer, but no less manipulative. Her mother's gentle pleas, her father's clipped orders, both of them acting as if the only problem was Sophia's sudden refusal to do what she'd always done. But Sophia wasn't that woman anymore. She had seen what it cost her to keep playing the part of the fixer, and she was done paying for it. One night after another long day at the office, Sophia stood by her window and looked out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. She thought about the life she was building, one where she didn't have to apologize for who she was, one where she didn't have to beg to be seen. She thought about the quiet strength she had found in letting go, in refusing to carry the burdens of a family that had never really been hers. And in that silence, she realized she had finally become the woman she was always meant to be. She didn't know what Emily would do next. She didn't know if her parents would ever reach out again with anything more than demands and half-hearted justifications. But for the first time, she didn't need to know. Because the story she was writing now was hers alone, no longer shaped by their expectations, no longer built on the quiet sacrifices she'd been told were her duty. She was done with duty. She was done with pretending. And as she turned away from the window, the city lights behind her, she felt a quiet certainty settle in her chest. Whatever came next, she would face it on her own terms. As the days turned into weeks, Sophia found herself adjusting to a new rhythm, one that didn't include the constant weight of her family's expectations pressing against her chest. She still woke up early, savoring the quiet of her small apartment, as she sipped her espresso and watched the light change across the Boston skyline. But there was a new clarity in the way she moved through her mornings, a new ease in the way she carried herself. She no longer felt the need to check her phone for their messages, no longer felt the jolt of anxiety when she saw her mother's name pop up on the screen. Instead, she let those calls go to voicemail and let the words they might carry fade into the background noise of her life. At the office, Sophia was focused and present her attention sharp and unwavering. Lucas, too, had settled into his role, his interactions with her measured and respectful. They didn't talk about Emily, didn't mention the birthday party or the night everything fell apart. In the quiet professionalism that passed between them, there was a kind of unspoken understanding the past didn't belong in these halls, and they would both be better for it. Sophia found a strange comfort in that, a relief in knowing that at least here she could define herself without apology or explanation. Still, there were moments, small, sharp moments, when the past tried to claw its way back in. Late at night, she would remember the tremor in Emily's voice in her last message, the desperate pleading that felt so familiar it almost broke through the calm she'd built around herself. She would remember the way her father's words had sliced through her resolve like a blade, how her mother's gentle sighs had always been laced with quiet disappointment. But she no longer let those memories shape her present. She had spent too long letting them do that, and she was done. One rainy Thursday, Sophia came home to find a small envelope slipped under her door. No return address, no note, just her name, written in her father's unmistakable handwriting. She stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of it in her hands, then set it on the kitchen table and walked away. She made herself dinner, cleaned the dishes, and only when the apartment was still and the night had deepened did she sit down and open it. Inside was a check for $2,000. No explanation, no apology, just the same unspoken demand she had always known. She read the numbers carefully, the neat script of her father's signature, and felt nothing but a cold, steady resolve. She tore it in half, then in half again, and dropped the pieces in the trash. She wouldn't be bought back into their orbit. Not now, not ever. She realized as she watched the scraps of paper fall away that her father's offer had never been about helping her. It was about control, about reasserting the quiet hold he'd always had on her life. And in rejecting it, she wasn't just refusing the money, she was refusing the idea that her worth was something they could measure or define. The next morning, she woke up feeling lighter than she had in years. She took a long walk through the early spring rain, the city fresh and alive around her, and let herself smile at the thought that she was finally free. She was no longer the fixer, no longer the quiet sister waiting for scraps of love. She was just Sophia, a woman who had learned finally, irrevocably, to see herself clearly. When she got back to her apartment, she found another message waiting for her from Emily. "I know you're hurt," it began, "but can't we find a way back to what we had? I miss having you in my life. Please, Sophia." The words were soft-edged with the same desperation that had always been there, but Sophia read them with a new understanding. Emily didn't miss her. Emily missed what she had always done for her, the quiet support, the silent sacrifices, the way she had always stepped in to fix what Emily didn't want to face. And Sophia wasn't that woman anymore. She typed out a reply, her fingers steady on the keys. "Emily," she wrote, "I wish you well, but I'm not coming back to the place you built on my silence. I hope you find what you're looking for, but I won't be there to hold it together anymore." She hit send and leaned back in her chair, the tension that had lived in her shoulders for so long finally slipping away. That weekend, she spent hours at her favorite cafe, a little place with a wooden sign that read, "Home is not always a place. Sometimes it's a choice." She let the words settle into her bones as she sipped her latte, feeling the truth of them echo in her chest. Home had never been the house she'd grown up in. It was this quiet moment of peace, this sense of finally belonging to herself. She thought about all the years she had spent trying to be enough for people who only saw what they wanted to see. She thought about how she had let their opinions shape her choices, how she had tried to twist herself into someone they could be proud of, and she realized with a quiet certainty that she didn't owe them that anymore. She didn't owe them her peace. She didn't owe them her life. As she watched the rain blur the city streets beyond the cafe window, Sophia felt something shift deep inside her. She understood finally that love wasn't meant to be earned like a paycheck. It wasn't something you could buy with endless sacrifice or silent loyalty. Real love was built on respect, on mutual recognition, on the willingness to see and be seen. And if her family couldn't offer that, she was no longer willing to take the scraps they did offer. That night, she stood on her balcony, the cool air brushing against her skin, and felt the first stirrings of something she hadn't let herself feel in years' possibility. She didn't know what the future would look like. She didn't know if Emily would ever understand, or if her parents would ever let go of the narratives they'd woven so tightly around her. But she knew that she would keep going, that she would keep building the life she wanted, piece by careful piece. Because for the first time in her life, she understood that her story wasn't something to be hidden or smoothed over for someone else's comfort. It was hers, messy, complicated, and beautifully unfinished. And she was done waiting for someone else to write the ending. Sophia stood in her apartment that Sunday morning, the late spring sun pouring through the windows, warming her face as she let the last pieces of the past settle around her. She had cut the final threads that had once bound her to a family that never truly saw her, and for the first time in years, she felt the gentle weight of her own freedom. She knew Emily might never truly understand. She knew her parents might never find the words to say what she had always longed to hear. But that was no longer her burden to carry. She didn't need their apologies, their belated kindness, or their carefully crafted stories to feel whole. She had built something that didn't depend on their approval, something quiet, strong, and real. That morning, she walked to her favorite coffee shop, letting the soft breeze brush against her face, her shoulders squared with the confidence of a woman who had finally stepped out of the shadows. She ordered her drink and took her seat by the window, the same spot she always chose, and watched the world outside with a new kind of ease. She thought about the path she'd walked to get here, the years of quiet sacrifice, the nights spent alone with her doubts, the slow, painful unlearning of everything she'd been taught about family and love. And she realized with a small wry smile that she wouldn't trade it for anything, because every step had brought her here to this moment of calm, to this certainty that she was enough just as she was. Sophia knew the journey wasn't over. There would be more lessons to learn, more days when the ache of old wounds tried to pull her back. But she also knew that she had found something stronger than their demands, the quiet power of her own truth. She didn't need their permission to keep moving forward, to keep choosing herself day after day. She had become the author of her own story, and she was done letting anyone else hold the pen. If you've ever felt like Sophia, like you're done being the fixer, the quiet supporter, then know this: your story is yours alone. Share it. Let it be the light for someone else still finding their way home.